Well, hey, good morning, church. We are so excited that you've joined us today. Thanks for joining on Facebook or YouTube or Church Online, wherever you are. We are so glad that you've joined us. This is not ideal. Man, I wish so bad I could look out in the auditorium right now and see your faces. I wish I could head out into the commons and shake your hand and give you a big hug and see you. That can't happen right now. We can't be in the same physical space. But here are two things that I know for sure. One, we can still have community. We can still spend time together. Wherever you are online, you can still say hello to people. You can still invest into each other's life. We can still worship together. We can still hear messages together. And we are so blessed to have that opportunity. And here's the second thing. The Holy Spirit is in this room right now. Church is still happening. God is still here. And I pray right now you would feel the same thing in your homes, wherever you are. I pray right now that you would feel the presence of God so tangibly in your environment that you would feel like you are still a part of the church, that you're still a part of this community. I feel that you could still feel close to the people you're watching online with. This morning, we're going to talk about generosity. Go ahead and flip over in your Bibles to 2 Samuel chapter 9. We're going to be there in just a moment. This is the title of today's message. We are made for generosity. We are made for generosity. Man, I feel super lucky that I get to talk about this, because this week I had such a real and tangible experience with generosity, right? So me and my wife, we actually moved on Tuesday. Me and my wife and my kids, we packed up all of our stuff. We moved to a new home, and it was incredible. We had a ton of family and friends come and help out and pack boxes and move stuff, unload stuff, load it up. It was such a blessing. We had people helping out, watching the kids, and it was such a physical representation of what it's like to have people step up and be in your life when it's not easy. Moving is my least favorite thing, maybe in the entire world. At the end of the process, I literally grabbed Pastor Chris, and I grabbed him, and I looked at him, and I said, hey man, if I tell you in 5 years, hey, I found a deal on a house, I want to move, just say no. Hit me, tell me not to do it, remind me of how awful this experience is. It's not worth it. Then it's also, when I first moved to Lancaster, this is like 5 years ago now, I moved from Akron. I was just graduated college. I wasn't married yet, and I filled up like half of the smallest U-Haul that they possibly even made. I had like one couch and some t-shirts, and that's it. I had no idea in such a small amount of time how much stuff you can just gather in one place. We loaded up the biggest U-Haul they have in like 3 pickup trucks, and we still had to go back for more. And it hits that point where you're like, I'm lighting it all on fire. Anybody who wants it can come have it. Flash sale, take it all. I don't even care. I'm going to live like a monk. It doesn't matter anymore, right? So crazy. Moving is one of the most insanely frustrating processes that we could possibly go through. But I had all these incredible people come out and help me because they were being generous. And at face value, that doesn't make any sense. Like, what's the benefit of that? Okay, so think about like something called survival of the fittest. So survival of the fittest is this principle that the strong survive and continue and the weak don't. So anything that would help out the weak, anything that would help someone who's in need, who has a need that could be filled, by nature, you shouldn't want to assist that. It takes away your time, your money, your resources, any of the things that you have, right? That's the stuff anytime I give that away, it's less for me. So we see this in nature. When it comes to survival, when it comes to evolution, if you believe in that, that's what generosity would stand in opposition to it. But for some reason, us as people feel this need and this desire to be generous, and it doesn't make any sense. Like all those people who came and helped me move, like they got really cheap pizza out of the deal. Like that's it. They got really low quality pizza, and that's it. I couldn't give them money. I couldn't give them anything else. Generosity doesn't make any sense. It's anti-survival of the fittest. And I think that this is one of the most compelling cases for Christianity. I think it's one of the most compelling cases for Christianity. Right? Because we know that this isn't something that you would naturally find in your own human nature. It doesn't make any sense. It has to mean that we're made in the image of a God who does value generosity. Why else would we feel that? It's not something we would just gather on our own. We feel this urge and this need and this desire to be generous with each other because we're made in the image of a creator who's generous. That's who God is. The fact that he even created us to begin with, what a dramatic act of generosity, right? That's one of the defining characters of who God is, his dramatic generosity towards us. And because we're made in his image, we feel that same urge and desire, and it goes against what would be our natural bent as humans. And we see this all throughout the Bible. Time and time again, God is generous with his people. I believe even in the worst stories in the Bible that break your heart. One of my least favorite stories is actually Noah. Bums me out. I hate this idea of God literally looking at his own people and saying, I can't work with you anymore. I have to restart. I'm going to take this family. I'm going to begin again. And it's devastating and it's hard to read. But even that, I think, is this dramatic example of generosity from God, of him saying, you guys aren't going to figure this out. If I allow you to continue, you're going to have generations upon generations upon generations of brokenness. So even God in his generosity said, I'm going to start over so that there is a chance for success. So there's a chance that your people could come and have me forever. So even in the worst stories in the Bible, even the stuff that's really hard to read, even the stuff that's confusing and difficult, I view it as a dramatic act of generosity from the Father. And because we're made in his image, that's why we feel that same exact burden in our heart. And here's where we get that wrong. If you've heard me teach before, this is something that I frequently say, we're the worst, right? Pastor Matthew just talked about it a couple weeks ago. Universally, everyone that I've ever met, we're no good, right? We have good aspects of us, and that's great, and that's all fine and good, but the reality is, as people, we mess things up. That's the challenge. I feel like because we're made in God's image, we have the desire for holiness. We want to be good. We want to be righteous, but we mess things up. And I think when it comes to generosity, while we have this urge and this feeling, this desire to be generous, in the process, we still mess it up. And I think here's how. Here's where we get it wrong. We're generous with what we have left over. We're generous with what we have left over. So God showed even from creation, what he had, he gave to us. He gave us life. He gave the process of creation in itself. As people, oftentimes, we're generous with what we have left over, not with what we have to begin with. I think an example of that is something like the lottery, right? Like if you won the lottery, what are you going to do? We're going to buy a house. We're going to buy a bunch of cars. I'm going to buy a lot of really nerdy stuff, like really shameful. Like I'm going to buy comic books. I'm not even going to list it. I thought about it. I have it in my notes that I was going to. But I'm not even going to list it. I'm going to buy a lot of really, really, really dumb stuff, right? That's who I am as a person. And then oftentimes when you hear people talking about, I'm going to win the lottery, what am I going to do? Well, and then what's left over, I'll give to the church, give to a charity. Maybe I'll invest it, right? Say things like that. It's almost like the boring stuff at the end. I'll be generous with what I have left over after I buy the things that I want. Or like your income tax return, if you get one. If it comes in, what am I going to do? Well, I love tattoos. Well, every year almost when income tax, I have it planned out in my head. I usually go get a tattoo. And then if I have anything left over, I'll be really generous with the church or I'll buy someone a gift, whatever the case might be. It's almost an afterthought, right? I think what should be our primary focus, which is generosity, because we continue to mess things up, it's become an afterthought for us. And if you're not a money person, that's fine. Some people just don't put a high value on things or money, and that's totally okay. But all of us have something that is valuable to us. Take, for instance, your time. It's the most valuable resource you have. Money is easy to make. I can go sell something I have and make money. I can go pick up a second job and make more money, right? Any of us can go make money. We can't get more time. We have a limited amount of time on earth. And what a dramatic example of what generosity can be and what it cannot be. Are you going to be generous with your time? This guy wants to go get coffee with me. I'm not really interested. You know, he seems kind of weird. I don't want to do that. It doesn't seem like a fun time. Or I had this plan with a friend. Something better came up. I'm not going to invest my time in that. I don't want to go help someone move because moving is the worst thing that's ever happened. So I'm going to do something else with my time, right? We can be generous. We can be anti-generous with our time. I can be generous with what I have with my time, or I can give what I have left over. So what's the purpose of generosity? What's the purpose of having things in general? What if the purpose of even having to begin with isn't to have? What if the purpose is generosity? The purpose of having is generosity. That's so huge because in our human nature, we have this idea that generosity is what you do with what's left. But what if we began to understand that the purpose of what you had to begin with is to be generous with people? There's a proverb. The book of Proverbs was written by a guy named Solomon. This is just like a little side story just because I think it's cool. It has nothing to do with my message, right? There's a guy named Solomon. He's the son of David. David had a very infamous falling out where he killed a guy, had a child with his wife. The child didn't make it. Devastating situation that was really the downfall of King David. But here's what's so incredible. King David's second son with Bathsheba would be Solomon, the man who would go on to pray for wisdom and would become the most wise man to have ever walked the earth according to the Bible. That's not what we're talking about today. I just think it's really cool. So yeah, there you go. So this is Solomon. That's the guy who wrote this. This is the son of King David and Bathsheba, the most wise man to ever walk the earth. And this is what he said. This is Proverbs 11:24. One gives freely, yet grows all the richer. Another withholds what he should give, and only suffers want. Whoever brings blessing will be enriched. and the one who waters will himself be watered. So I'm going to read that again. One who gives freely grows all the richer. Another withholds what he should give, and he only suffers want. This totally turns over what we usually operate when it comes to the things that we have. We can all understand that a natural part of the human condition is wanting stuff, right? Like, I don't care who you are. Again, you might not be a money person, but we all want stuff. That's a part of being a human. It's a part of the human condition. We all have things that we want. What Solomon here is saying, that literally the person who gives the most is the person who wants less. And then the more you hold on to what you have, the more you hold it close to your heart, that's the more you end up wanting. You'll never be satisfied. It flips this entire dynamic on its head. It turns it around. It talks about freely giving. One gives freely, it grows all the richer. Listen, freely giving doesn't mean giving when you feel like it's necessary. Freely giving doesn't mean giving when you feel like it's convenient. Freely giving doesn't mean giving when you got paid a little bit extra this month. Freely giving means freely giving, right? It means giving what you have openly and freely as you have it. That's the process of freely giving. So Solomon isn't saying, hey, the person who is really generous with what they have left over. He's saying what you have, you will give. This morning I want to tell 3 quick stories about 3 different people who I think exemplify what this giving looks like, what freely giving looks like. And the first one is my grandma, Kathy. All right? So I just want to paint a really vivid picture before I get into how generous she is. My grandma, Kathy, I'm not kidding, is one of the coolest, hippest people I've ever met in my entire life. I'm not kidding. My grandma, Kathy, was on Snapchat before I was. That's a real thing. I promise, she has a group chat called Grandma's Descendants. Like, she named it herself on Snapchat, where all of her grandkids are on it just so she can keep up with what's going on. And she's the most active member. Her Snapchat score is higher than mine. My grandma runs the game on Snapchat. If you told me, hey man, I saw your grandma Kathy on TikTok, I would believe you. Like, she's hit, man. She's on the cutting edge. Like, no matter what is happening in technology, she had a Facebook before I did. She's just on it. She knows what's going on. My grandma was the kind of person that throughout my entire life exemplified generosity no matter what. They were never rich. They never had a ton of extra money laying around, but they constantly were generous to the point that it was even confusing to me as a kid. They have a house that, I kid you not, is probably like 700 square feet. It's a small house, and I've never seen less than like 100 people in it. It's unbelievable. They just pack people in, and they feed them, and they buy food, and my grandpa just cooks up, and he's got his taco thing, and my grandma's got her lasagna, and they're cooking for everybody nonstop. They're just people, and it doesn't matter. People I've never seen before. Like, who's that? My grandma, I don't know, but they're here. They want food. I'm not going to not give them food. They just feed people. They're incredible, and they feed them spiritually. She's generous with her wisdom. Like, that's the kind of people that they are. They give with an open hand. It's unbelievable. My grandfather, I had my air conditioner and my furnace go out in a week. It was a whole ordeal, right? One of them caught on fire. Wild, right? My grandpa, who's late into his 70s and has lung cancer, got in his truck, drove 3 hours to come, sit on a stool, and walk me through how to fix it so I didn't have to pay for someone to do it. You want to talk about generosity? It's not that he had extra energy. He's fighting for his life right now. It's not like he had a bunch of extra energy laying around. He's like, well, maybe I'll go help out Michael. He did it because that's who he is as a person. My grandma and my grandpa, they're generous like that. To the point where it's dangerous. It's like, again, we're looking around the house like, Grandma, that guy's got a knife. Who let him in? It doesn't matter. They were just so welcoming to everybody all the time. That's who they are as people. And that was such a blessing to me growing up because it gave me such a tangible example of how you're supposed to operate. My grandma didn't wait till she was rich to start being generous. She never has been. If you were to ask her, she'd say, the riches that I have are by giving to people. That's how she operates in her life. The second person I want to talk about is a guy named Mephibosheth, who I think is the most underrated character in the whole Bible. Mephibosheth. I think the only reason that story is not more popular because that is a very silly name. And not only that, I'm going to read this passage, and I'm going to give you a heads up right now. I don't know how to say half the words. I tried my best to understand what half of these names and locations are. I don't get it. This guy named Mephibosheth, here's the context, right? So Mephibosheth is the... I can't even say his name now. All right. Mephibosheth, he was the son of Jonathan. For those of you who don't know, Jonathan was the son of Saul, who was David's predecessor. So Saul's the king. He hates David, tries to kill him. David ends up inheriting the throne. Saul and Jonathan both die. Now, Jonathan, Mephibosheth's father, was best friends with David. Like a really incredible representation of what biblical friendship should look like, right? So these two guys, Jonathan is no longer with us. King David is the king, and he calls out to one of his servants, and he tells him, "Is there anybody in Jonathan's house still alive that I could honor?" And this is so bizarre culturally. So back in that time, if you were to become a new king, and the last lineage is gone, so you're not related to Saul, so this is like a new bloodline of new kings, the tradition would be to kill every single person who was related to the last king, because out of the fear that they would come try to overtake the throne so that your family lineage could have that throne back. So traditionally, King David even asking that question, the first thought is probably like, oh, he's going to kill anybody that's left with Jonathan. But he asked one of his servants, Ziba, and he says, "Hey, is there anybody left alive in Jonathan's house?" And this was his response. So this is the passage I had you turn to, 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 3. "There's still a son of Jonathan. He's crippled in his feet. And the king said to him, 'Where is he?' And Ziba said to the king, 'He's in the house of some guy, the son of another guy at this place.' Then King David said, and brought him from the house of Machir, the son of Amiel at Lodabar, and Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came to David and fell on his face and paid homage. And David said, 'Mephibosheth.' And he answered, 'Behold, I am your servant.'" So think about this from Mephibosheth's perspective for a minute. You know this culturally. First of all, he has got two things working against him. He's related to Saul, Saul's grandson. He might not know about the relationship between David and Jonathan, their friendship. What he does know is that his grandfather was the prior king who was trying to kill the man you're right in front of. And culturally, that means you're likely going to die. The second thing is he was crippled in his feet. And at the time, sadly, culturally, your value was extraordinarily low if you could not provide. If you were crippled, if you had a disability, sadly, they didn't have any kind of safety net for these people. They didn't value them. So he's in this perspective where he's standing in front of the king who has every right to kill him. On top of that, people like him, people who shouldn't even be in the same presence of the king. So he's probably upset and he's nervous. And David said, "Mephibosheth." And he answered, "Behold, I'm your servant." And David said to him, "Do not fear, for I will show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. And I will restore you to the land of Saul your father. You shall eat at my table always." And he paid homage, and he said, "What is your servant that you should show regard for a dead dog such as I?" So like I said, culturally, Mephibosheth, when he compared himself to a dog, that was accurate to how people viewed him. He probably spent his entire life being viewed as less because of his condition. He's probably used to his whole life people looking down on him, people not assigning him value because of something that was out of his control. So to have this man, the highest power, look to him and say, "You will have a seat at my table. I'm going to return you to your land. You're going to have a seat at my table for now, your ancestors as well." Well, they would go on to say, your children and their children, they'll all have a seat at my table forever. It was unprecedented. David had every right to end this man's life, but he chose to be generous. He chose to go out of his way to give him a place of honor at his table, the table of the king. And he didn't do it because of Mephibosheth's heroism, right? Mephibosheth has no history of being this great superhero guy who was a big supporter of David, right? And we don't know. He was just a guy. He didn't earn that right. King David was generous with Mephibosheth, not because of who he was or what he did, but because of who his father was. That takes me to the last story. A couple thousand years ago, there was a homeless Middle Eastern immigrant who sought refuge in Egypt to avoid persecution. After some years, he and his family returned to a small town named Galilee, where he grew up to be a carpenter. At the age of 30, he started his ministry, and he gained many followers. He turned water into wine, he healed the blind, brought a man back from the dead, and he washed feet, and they killed him. So we were talking about God himself decided to humble himself to become his own creation. That in itself is an act of dramatic generosity that's almost hard to understand. To be God, to be all-knowing, all-powerful, and to choose humility, to say, I want to go and be with the people because that's what they need right now, is incredible. And he came and he walked among us and he healed people and he ministered to people. He forgave people of sins. He brought dead people back to life. He healed the blind. He did everything he could to love us well, and then we killed him, right? As I said earlier, that's what we do as people. We mess stuff up. It's always been a part of our role. From the very beginning in Genesis, God sets Adam and Eve up with the perfect situation. They messed it up. So just like we do every day, I think sometimes it's easy to look back and to think so little of people in the Bible and think, how could they mess it up? You're walking in the presence of Jesus. We still do it. We're broken. That's how we operate as people. We still do it every day. We didn't deserve Jesus coming down and saving us. We didn't deserve the fact that he decided to allow himself to be murdered to forgive our sins. I didn't earn that. I didn't act holy enough to make Jesus want to come do that for me. It had nothing to do with what I've done. In the same way that Mephibosheth didn't earn grace and generosity from David. It's because of who our Father is. It's because of God. It's because of how radically and dramatically he loves us. And church, that is who we're made in the image of. We are image bearers of that same God. We're made in his image. So this feeling of generosity that we feel deep down within us, it's not something small and it's not a small deal. It's because we should be exemplifying our Creator, who is endlessly generous time and time again. That brings us to our first point. I'm going to go through 3 points kind of quick. Here's the first one. Don't qualify your generosity. Church, Jesus did not qualify his death. He didn't ask me of anything before he died for me. I wasn't born yet. You weren't born yet. He didn't ask me for anything for him to be that radically generous with me. He just gave with an open hand anyways, exactly like Solomon talked about. He gave with an open hand. We didn't have to earn it. There's nothing we could have done. Like I said, in the same position with Mephibosheth. It's not like he did anything to earn this place at the table of the king. Think about how that applies to us for a minute. Do you know how many times I miss this? It's devastating. I miss this all the time. The amount of times I've said things in my own head of like, man, why does my money go to people who haven't earned it? I'll never forget that. I'm going to be really transparent. I was like 16 years old. I got my first paycheck. I saw how much money went out in my taxes. Very frustrating, right? Like we can all agree that was a bummer. Like I thought I was going to get X amount of money. I got significantly less. Not fun. Right? And then you realize like, oh, it goes to all this different things. I just remember being so upset. I'm like, why is my money going to help people who did they go work at Pizza Hut to earn that money? No. Man, I am so grateful that Jesus doesn't have that perception when he looks at me. I'm so grateful that he's better than I am, that he's more generous than what I am, that he doesn't look at me and think, wow, Michael doesn't deserve this. Why would I go give my life for someone who's so very unworthy who probably wouldn't even do the same for me? What do I have to offer? What could I possibly have to offer Jesus? What possibly could have Mephibosheth had to offer King David? Not wisdom. Couldn't go fight for him in a war. That's the reality of who God is. Church, that's who Jesus is. He doesn't qualify his generosity, and we are called to do the same thing. Don't qualify your generosity. Don't only give to people who you think will further you socially. Don't only give to people who you think might hook you up down the road. Give with an open hand because that's what God does. Don't qualify it. Give with an open hand. This weekend, like I said, I was moving, stressful time. I actually didn't ask him if I can tell this story. He's back there running slides right now, so we can delete this later if you want. But Pastor Chris, we're getting ready to move, and his wife Cassie came over. She was helping Gina with our kids as Gina was like packing stuff up. And before she left money on our counter and said, hey, we budgeted this aside for you to put in, for you to do this construction project to the new house you're buying, and Chris is going to like help Michael set it up. That's unbelievable. Chris didn't do that because I had anything to give him back. I promise I don't. The amount of times that Chris Reed has gotten me out of trouble and been at my house fixing my plumbing, it's all the time. I can't even tell you. Unbelievable amount. He shows up whenever he can and he helps any way that he can. That's who the Reeds are as people. Do you know why? Because that's who Jesus is. And they're exemplifying Jesus through their actions. He doesn't qualify it. Like I said, he knows I can't help him with anything. He knows he's going to help with that project and it's going to be mostly me watching and asking questions. Why are you doing it that way? He knows what he's getting into. That's his character. That's who he is as a person. All right, here's point number 2. Give well. When I was a kid, my mom would oftentimes give us chores, specifically dishes. To this day, I hate dishes more than just about anything. I just hate them. I don't know why. I turn into like a 4-year-old anytime I have to do it. And I could lie and say, like, that was just then. It still happens now. Like, I still get fussy when I have to do dishes. I just hate it, right? But my mom would tell us to do stuff, and I remember her saying, just like a mom would, like, hey, if you're not going to do it with a happy heart, don't do it at all. And it felt like the most passive-aggressive, like, okay, fine. But man, that has stuck with me throughout my entire life. If you're going to do something, if you're going to be generous, do it well. Do it cheerfully. Do it with a happy heart. There's a passage in 2 Corinthians chapter 9 I'm going to read real quick. Just some context. The Apostle Paul is essentially bragging, right? He's bragging in this letter to the church in Corinth saying, I tell people all the time about you guys. And it really is a call to action. He said, don't mess it up. I've hyped it up, don't mess it up. This is what he says. The point is this. Whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. So whoever gives little will reap little, right? Whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. There it is, right? Don't do it reluctantly. Don't do it begrudgingly. Do it because God asked you to. Don't be generous and be like, oh, I guess I have to. Guys, we have the opportunity to be generous, and when we're generous, we have the opportunity to be more like God. If that is not something worthy of a happy heart, of being cheerful, of being excited, of being joyful, what is? What could be more exciting than being more like Jesus? I'm not trying to say that it's like always fun, because it's not, right? It's not. It's a challenge. But man, don't let the challenge prevent you from being cheerful in your giving and in your generosity. I don't think for a second that Jesus was dying on a cross really happy and excited, right? But man, I know for a fact that what gave him the willpower to go through is that he knew what he had to do, and he knew that he was going to do it because he loved us. And in that sense, that's where that fulfillment comes in. And we get to be like that. Every time we have an opportunity to die to ourselves and do the challenging thing, we can do it with a cheerful heart. There's a passage in the Bible where Jesus is talking about prayer. And he's essentially talking to his followers and calling out people who are too showy about the way they pray. He says they're out there in the streets and they're making a big scene, like a very much look at me thing, look how holy I am, look how righteous I am. And Jesus would correct them and say, hey, go pray in a quiet space. And that's where he would do the Lord's Prayer and say, here's how I want you to pray, in humility, right? Here's the last point. Start now. Start now. Don't wait. Listen, if you're not generous when you have little, you won't be generous when you have much. If you're not generous right now, don't expect, well, one day when I'm better off financially, I'll all of a sudden be more generous. One day when I have more time, right? I'm really busy right now. I can't afford to be more generous with my time. If you're not doing it right now, don't trick yourself into thinking you're going to magically start doing it when you have more of it. It's just going to compound your problems. If you think, well, I'll have more time, you'll find other ways to busy yourself. Well, I'll have more money, you'll spend it in different ways. Start generosity right now, whatever that looks like. Don't be somebody that puts it off for more opportunity. There's another example. My friend Kenny, this is a real story. This is one of the craziest things that's ever happened to me. He called me probably 2 weeks ago, and he said, hey, I bought you a birthday present. And I was like, buddy, my birthday is in December, like late in December. It is July. Like, what do you mean you bought me a birthday present? He's like, no, yeah, it's great. I bought you a birthday present. I got to come over right now. Are you free? I was like, I guess. like, okay. And he came over to my house, and he gave me this present, a super generous gift. I'm looking at it, and I'm thinking, like, this dude, he didn't have to do that. But think about what we're talking about when it comes to starting now. I know Kenny's not a super rich guy. It's not like Kenny's a super wealthy person who just goes around blessing people. Kenny realized he had an opportunity to love someone well. He saw something, thought, oh, Michael would love that, and he made up an excuse to give it to me. Like, no one gives someone a birthday present 6 months early. So if you want to talk about starting now, he started that day, the day that he got it. He's like, today's the day I'm going and taking this over to Michael. It has to happen right now. This is what we're called to do. Don't wait until you have more. Don't wait until it feels right. Don't wait. Start being generous right now. And church, I feel like when I opened this message, I said, hey, we're going to talk about generosity. There's likely some of you that got nervous or concerned of like, oh man, he's going to talk about giving money to the church. I shared this on Facebook. Like, you're going to ask for money again. I hate when churches do that, whatever the case might be. And you were right. I'm going to be really honest with you. You need to be generous with the church. And if you don't come to our church, if you're just watching this on Facebook, be generous to whatever your local church is. And that might sound super self-serving because I work at a church, but here's the reality. I'm not telling you that because any church needs your money, although it helps them with ministry. I'm telling you that because if you are not being generous with your church, you're missing out on an opportunity to be like Jesus. If you're not giving to the church, you're missing out on an opportunity to have your life be filled with blessing because of your generosity. If you're not being generous with people with your time, your energy, your resources, your wisdom, your money, whatever the case might be, I'm telling you this because you're missing the heart of God. And that's a serious thing. It's a big deal. This might sound like a really dramatic statement, but I think it's important. If you're not a generous person, you're actively rebelling against God. If you're not a generous person, you're actively rebelling against God. You're rejecting the image of Christ in your DNA because you're saying that what I want is better. I want you to think about the power of that statement for a second. You're made in the image of God, someone who in his character is generous. And if we're not generous, what are we saying? That if we're supposed to be made in the image of God, but I'm not generous like God is, what I want is better somehow than what he would have for me? That's a devastating line of thinking. We have an opportunity to be more like Jesus. We have an opportunity to be more like God. And if we reject that, we're rejecting him. And I wish I could say it in a softer way than that. I thought about it. Can I say this in a way that feels kinder and more gentle? I just think this is the hard truth of it. If we're not generous, we're not like God. We're rejecting him and the things that he would ask us to do. And it doesn't mean we're going to be perfect. I'm not advocating for this idea that now I have to be generous all the time or else I'm not saved, right? No. Now I have to be perfect or else now I'm not in a relationship with God. Of course not. It's not what I'm saying at all. What I am saying is actively every single day we should be acting more and more and more like God. And when we mess things up like we always do, it's just another opportunity to be more like Christ. So what can I do next time? How can I fix this? How can I be better? How can I be more generous? Takes me back to what I opened up with, this idea that we get stuck in this mentality of I'll give what I have left over. I'll be generous with what I have extra. What if the only reason you have anything ever is to be generous? Then what you have left over, you get to keep that. After you're done being generous, you get to have that part. Isn't that what Jesus did with us? Start that now. Don't wait. Don't wait till you have more money. Don't wait till you hit the lottery. Don't wait till you have more time. Be generous now with what you have, and then what you have left over, that's for us. There's a story in Mark chapter 12. It's also in Luke 21. It's of Jesus, and he's sitting in the temple. He's talking with his disciples. This is verse 41. He sat down opposite the treasury and watched the people putting money into the offering box, which, imagine how horrifying that would be. Imagine, okay, so we have giving boxes in the back of the auditorium. Imagine if Jesus, God himself, just sat there. It's I'm thinking that 5's going to turn to a 20 real quick. Give it a little bit more now that Jesus is watching, right? Many rich people put in large sums, and a poor widow came. She put in 2 small copper coins, which make a penny. And he called his disciples to him, and he said to them, "Truly I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all of these who are contributing to the offering box. For they all contributed out of their abundance, but she gave out of her poverty, has put everything she had, all she had to live on." Listen, that woman gave nothing by human standards, right? It's a penny. It's literally what you throw in your coffee cup holder in your car, and you end up vacuuming it out a year later. It doesn't mean anything, right? But Jesus looked at this woman who gave that 1 penny and said she gave more than anybody. It's exactly this principle that we're talking about. It's not because she gave a great sum, right? It's because she gave from what she had from the beginning with, not what was left over. What we have isn't ours. This is what giving freely means. What giving freely with an open hand means. It doesn't mean give what you have at the end of the day, after you pay all your bills and after you buy the stuff you want to buy. It means leaving your hand open with what you have because it's God's to begin with. Be generous with every resource you have because that's why God gave it to you. Don't qualify your generosity. Give well. Give with a cheerful heart. Start now. Whatever that looks like for you today. So it could be time, money, resources, wisdom. Doesn't matter. Start right now. Let me pray. God, we are so grateful for you. We're so grateful that we have the opportunity to sit in your presence today. Even that in itself is such a dramatic act of generosity. The fact that we continue to mess things up, the fact that we're broken, but you still allow us to sit in your presence, to worship you, to be close to you, is yet another example of you being incredibly generous, and we are so grateful of that generosity. God, I pray that every single person watching this message, every single person in this room, including myself, that we would feel so burdened leaving this place to be generous. That we'd feel so burdened that this opportunity that we have to sacrifice and be more like you, that it wouldn't be something we took lightly. I pray that you would keep it on the forefronts of our mind, God. Convict us. Give us more opportunities to be generous. In your name we pray. Amen.